Good evening, all. How are you today? My name is Topeka K. Sam. I'm the founder and CEO of the Ladies of Hope Ministries, whose epic vision is to end poverty and incarceration of women and girls globally. Today, the Ladies of Hope Ministries Epic Repro Justice program, which is aimed at empowering women and non-binary justice-impacted individuals with the education and resources needed to have bodily autonomy and agency on their wellness journey. The goal is to change health outcomes and restore dignity to justice impacted individuals, particularly for Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. The LOHM works with community members who are impacted by the criminal legal system, health experts, lawmakers, and key players in the Department of Corrections to develop best practices and implement justice-driven solutions to restore dignity across the continuum of care. Everyone deserves access to health care they trust. Pregnant and parenting people who use substances are one of the most stigmatized and demonized subsets of the population. We believe that all people should have access to health care they can trust and deserve to have support during pregnancy, which is why we partnered with the National Harm Reduction Coalition to provide harm reduction training to our doulas. We're excited this evening to join some of industry leaders to talk about the issues that are women who are impacted by substance misuse are experiencing during pregnancy and the best practices on harm reduction. So thank you all for joining us. Super excited. I'm happy to introduce now our panelists. Tanagra was born and raised in Puerto Rico and is the proud daughter of Mexican and Cuban immigrants. She has over 20 years of experience in the fields of organizational and program development, evaluation, technical assistance, community organizing, and direct service with underserved, over-surveilled, and over-stigmatized folks, particularly within Latinx communities. She currently holds the National Learning and Engagement Strategist position at the National Harm Reduction Coalition. Whew, that's a lot of mouthful. Before moving to Oakland, she was working in Puerto Rico with women who are survivors of gender-based violence, focusing her work and activism around economic human rights of women. She holds an MSW from the University of Puerto Rico and was a lecturer for social students at the University of Puerto Rico, Rio Piedras campus, and the University of Turbado in All right, fantastic. Finally, Tanagra identifies as an intersectional feminist who believes in decolonization as the way towards liberation. And thank you so much for joining. I appreciate it. And I am leaving out last names just for the sake of grace, because these are some powerful last names and I don't want to mess up. So Tanagra, can you please give everyone your full name?
Thank you so much, Topeka. Yes, my name is Tanagra Melgarejo, and I'm very excited to be here. Buenas tardes, good afternoon, good evening, buenas noches.
Thank you so much for that. Our next panelist is Dr. Carolyn. I'm purposely not saying her last name because I just want it to be equity across the board. Is a researcher and obstetrician gynecologist at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine and the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. She has worked extensively on reproductive health issues affecting incarcerated women, from providing clinical care in jail to research and policy and advocacy. Dr. Suffren is founder and director of the Hopkins-based research group, Advocacy and Research on Reproductive Wellness of Incarcerated People, ARRWIP. Her work is situated at the intersection of reproductive justice, healthcare, and mass incarceration, which she examines in her book, Jail Care, Finding the Safety Net for Women Behind Bars. Welcome, Dr. Carolyn.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Thank you so much. And can you just share your last name? I know it, but.
My last name is Suffren.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much. And now we are going to introduce Iola, who is a birth and postpartum doula of 10 years with a focus on Black maternal health and foster care adoption. Iola's work has included collaborations with the Minnesota Department of Health, Hennepin County, multiple speaking engagements with parent-focused conference nationally, and collaborative work with other birth workers in the state of Minnesota on the doula Medicaid bill. Her work is deeply personal to her. She is a foster to adoptee and a Black birthing person who has connected with over 100 families and giving them the tools for self-empowerment during some of life's most important moments. Welcome, Iola.
Hi, thank you for having me. And I guess last name, Iola, I'm Iola Kostrowski. And again, thank you for having me. And I kind of feel like a deer in headlights because I'm in the room with like powerful people. So thank you again.
Oh, stop it. You are just as powerful. Look, now we have collective power here. So super duper excited to hear from you. And I'm sure everyone else who's tuning in is as well. And Jamil was raised in New York City and Charleston, South Carolina. She earned a BA in Media Studies from Pomona College and studied film at the Prague Film School in Czech Republic. Wow. She worked as an associate producer on the documentary projects for Oprah Winfrey Network, Viceland, and Discovery Network. She's since transitioning into narrative screenwriting and directing. Jamil has continued to create socially minded, character-driven stories. Her goal is not only to entertain, but also to inspire, inform, and heal. Jamil's first short film, Heartland, was screened at several Academy qualifying film festivals, including Santa Barbara International Film Festival, Austin Film Festival, St. Louis International Film Festival, and Black Star Film Festival, where it was nominated for the Stars Award for the Best Speculative Fiction Short. Heartland won the Audience Choice Award at Indie Shorts International Film Festival, all in 2021, and Best Live Action Short at the Atlanta Sci-Fi Film Festival. Her most recent film, The Bond, which we are partnering to screen, and you'll learn more about that after the panel, has by Film Independent and raised over $26,000 on Quickstarter in just 2 weeks. Jamil's awards include the New York Times Scholarship, Terry Schwartz Family and Friends Scholarship, and the Four Sisters Scholarship from writer-directors Gina Prince Bythewood, Sarah Finney Johnson, Felicia D. Henderson, and Mara Brock Akil. Jamil is currently completing her MFA in directing at UCLA School of Theater, Film, and Television. We are so grateful to have you also. Welcome. Jamil, I see you here. Can you hear us? Okay, well, she's at UCLA right now. I know she's having slight tech issues, but we did see her, so she is here, and we'll definitely make sure that we include her in the conversation. So we'll get started with Tanagra. We are seeing overdose rates rise every day as the war on drugs, the war on people with substance use continues in this country. We know we need to approach drug use and pregnancy differently. Can you talk about the work we are doing at the National Harm Reduction Coalition around pregnancy and substance use, please?
Yeah, absolutely. As I said, I'm really grateful to be here and to be able to engage with all of you and community around this conversation that is really timely, particularly what we're seeing currently happening in the world and in the United States, both around the attack on reproductive rights, bodily autonomy of pregnant and parenting people, but also the attacks that are occurring around the rights, the health, the lives of folks that have trans-lived experience, particularly young people. And so I think for us as an organization, it's something that is deeply, profoundly personal, because this work that we do, harm reduction, has to do with reclaiming, giving people who use drugs, those of us that use drugs, the right to reclaim control over our bodies and our choice. And that's beautifully said, but it's really hard done, right? When we live in systems that are intent in criminalizing and stigmatizing us. And so the Harm Reduction Coalition that has been around for 30 years almost. We haven't reached 30 yet. We're on our way. Was an organization that was founded by people who use drugs for people who use drugs in the midst of the HIV pandemic, when they were left out of conversations that were happening at the national and local level in regards to how to best address that pandemic. And so people said, we need to take care of each other. Community cares for each other. We're going to organize, and then we're going to push. We're going to politically push to be included in that conversation. And out of that, this organization born. And we have been working for the past 20 some years. I'm embarrassed to forget when we were born, to uplift the rights and well-being of people who use drugs, including particularly the rights of people who are pregnant and parenting. And so we do that through training and capacity building. And one of our most recent projects that we're really proud of was a partnership with the Academy of Perinatal Harm Reduction to develop a beautiful toolkit that supports folks that want to work with people who are pregnant and parenting around how to best do that from a harm reduction approach. And I can share the link with all of you. I don't know how to do that here. It's new to me, but I can, if you want it, it's on our website. I can make sure you have access to it. It's also in the Academy's website as well. It is a great resource. It is mostly focused, New York State focused in terms of the legal information, but I also think that there's really fantastic information in regards to the harm reduction approach and how do you show up for people that can translate to many other parts of the world and this country. So if that's something that interests you, I think that, feel free to, check it out and check out the resources also in the Academy of Perinatal Harm Reduction as well. We also have a long-standing partnership for many years with the National Association of pregnant women, who have been in the forefront of, fighting the criminalization experienced by pregnant people who also use drugs. And we have seen recently, thankfully, some successes that they've had around, freeing people that have been punished or incarcerated in that intersection of substance use and what is potentially really dangerous, like that term feticide, right? Or, I don't know how to say that in English, right? ¿Cómo se dice en inglés? I was thinking how to say it in English. Is it feticide? It's feticide en español, but it's a very dangerous intersection. So I think that, at this moment, for us, our national conference is happening in October, and we are having it here in Puerto Rico, which makes me really, really excited. I'm really thrilled for the opportunity to have national and international harm reductionists come to this island and see the work that we're doing here. And I am also excited for those folks to connect with the people who are doing reproductive justice work here in Puerto Rico, because they have been at the forefront of a fight. Right now, we have a bill that is being discussed in the Senate that will make abortion illegal in this country. The only reason abortion access, if we want to say that, is legal here is because of Roe versus Wade. And so it is one of those trigger bills that would take effect. And so for us, thinking about people who use drugs, that would impact them. And I also think in terms of the impact that would have, particularly people who use drugs that want to carry a pregnancy to term, right? What would that mean in terms of our rights, our ability to make those decisions? And so for me, as a person who lives here, I want other people's solidarity around that, and to really see how we can continue to work together. And that's why I love the work that the LOHM does, because to me, the work that you do to provide access to doulas, provide access to care that is holistic, that is person-centered, that is empathetic, that is kind, that is loving, it's what we should have. It's our right, it's what we deserve. And I think that takes a lot of effort and a lot of education, and we don't have to do it alone. And so as the National Harm Reduction Coalition, as we have the opportunity to work with you all on this, and I think that we can, breaking silos is what helps us become stronger. And I think that this system is really intent in keeping us siloed for that particular reason. And so I see our work not only, I think our work is revolutionary. It's revolutionary love. And so at the Harm Reduction Coalition, we're committed to that. And we hope to continue to build these bridges and to continue to work to support bodily autonomy in all of its forms.
Thank you so much. We are super excited to partner with you all as well. The link was put into the chat so everyone can see how to go on. Absolutely. Shout out to Starling and Tanja, who are in the background doing what they do brilliantly. And just one more question, and then I'll move on to Dr. Carolyn, just about harm reduction, right? Can you just share a little bit more about that? I know that people will have that question. Sometimes there are so many terms that we are using, but people don't have an extensive understanding on specifically what that is. And so if you can just give us a little bit about that, that would be great too.
Absolutely, yes. I could talk about harm reduction all day. You would have to stop me. It's my passion and I love it. Harm reduction is both it's a framework. It's an approach to the way that we do our work, that we view ourselves in our work. And it's also a political movement, right? Harm reduction believes that people have the capacity in and of itself to make decisions for themselves about what's best for them. Harm reduction believes that people are able to have the smarts, the capacity, and the ability to determine, what path they want to move towards. Harm reduction doesn't have the expectation for people to move towards abstinence, although it believes abstinence is part of the spectrum of choices that people can make. And what we want to really center and focus is the expertise and the wisdom of each individual that we work with. Each person's journey is different, right? Because of who we are, because of what we bring, because of our experiences. And harm reduction gives us the opportunity as providers to really undo a lot of the learning that we have acquired through these systems that are set up to hurt, to harm, to punish, to dehumanize people, and to really work from a place of compassion, of empathy and respect. And ultimately, that respect is not only respect for the participant, for the person that we're supporting, but also for us as people, right? Harm reduction believes that what is good for people who use drugs is good for everybody. And so it believes in equity, it believes in justice, it believes in freedom, and it believes in the possibility of a future that allows us all to be healthy, safe, and well.
Well, that's revolutionary love. So I thank you for that in-depth description on what harm reduction is and how it should be applied and used really across all of our spaces. And when you talked about silos and breaking those silos, it is critical on how we do movement building and work in all of these spaces when we're trying to dismantle these systems that cause so much harm, specifically when it is gender focused. So thank you so much for your work. Dr. Carolyn, when we look at the rates of incarceration of women in this country, we know that women are being housed in county jails at extremely high rates. Many of these women are experiencing substance misuse issues. Can you talk about the research you are doing and what is being done as far as medical assisted treatment for pregnant people in jails presently?
Absolutely. And I'd love to also piggyback on the beautiful words that we just heard about harm reduction and acknowledge that if we're going to be talking about what happens and what doesn't happen to pregnant people who are behind bars, it has to be within the context of acknowledging the fact that there is no harm reduction if we're talking about prisons and jails other than to get rid of them. They are harmful, traumatizing places. And the work of harm reduction is very much aligned with abolition work, and this, the ending incarceration, certainly of pregnant people and all people, is part of this larger goal of harm reduction. However, that's not happening today or tomorrow, and we need to take care of the people who are there. And in the context of it being a traumatizing and harmful space. So what's happening now when it comes to people, to women behind bars, to pregnant people especially, and postpartum people behind bars who have substance use issues? Well, to answer that question, I think first requires having a little bit of context of what is the scope of these issues. And while we don't have clear, systematic, regular data that's collected about this, we can put some of the pieces together. So Topeka, as you mentioned, we know that the incarceration of women and also pregnant people in our county jails is huge, is significant, and it's estimated, the FBI statistics estimate or report that each year there are 1.7 million arrests of females. And so those people are going to county jails. Many of them will also be sentenced and be going to state or federal prisons, but many of them will not. And so, so county jails are really, this is where most females are held in this country. And most of them are there because they can't afford their bail, and most of them have been arrested for nonviolent charges that often relate to substance misuse and their lack of access to adequate treatment for that, as well as other mental health conditions. Although I will say that even if they are arrested and charged with violent charges, they still deserve adequate health care. So then thinking about being pregnant and having substance use issues in jail, also, in terms of context, thinking about, well, how many pregnant people are there in jails this year? And we don't have great data on this at all. My research team conducted a study where we tried to just aggregate the number of pregnant people admitted to prisons and how many gave birth and had other outcomes. And it's a little easier, although still not easy to do with state prisons because there's a finite number of them or a knowable number in 50 states. Jails, we don't even know how many jails exist in this country. It's somewhere around 3,000 or 3,300, based on the number of counties, but we actually don't know. So it's very hard to have any systematic data from jails. But we did enroll the 5 largest jails in our study where we collected pregnancy data for a year. And based on that and extrapolating up nationally, we estimated that there would be about 55,000 admissions of pregnant people to jails each year. 55,000, that is not a small number. Then we also asked facilities that participated in our study to report the number of people, pregnant people admitted who had opioid use disorder. So our data are only about opioid use disorder, not other substances. But in the jails, they reported that it was 14%. And so if we extrapolate that nationally, that's about 7,700. These are very rough estimates. But what they show is that this is not a small number of people we're talking about. So what happens if a pregnant person is brought to a jail and they have opioid use disorder? Well, the answer is it depends. It depends what jail you're at because there is no standardization of healthcare services at our nation's jails and prisons. And although there's a constitutional requirement that prisons and jails must provide access to healthcare, there are no requirements for what those healthcare services are. So you have some jails that do provide pregnant people and non-pregnant individuals with access to medication-assisted treatment, or what sometimes is called medications for opioid use disorder, so that the pregnant person can, number one, avoid opioid withdrawal, which is known to be harmful for the pregnancy and for the pregnant person and for the fetus. And it is so not the standard of care. Being on medications has for decades been the safe and recommended standard of care for pregnant people to optimize the outcomes for them and for their fetuses. In part because withdrawal is dangerous. It has in pregnancy especially, it has very high rates of recurrence with relapse rates as high as 90% and associated risks of fatal and non-fatal opioid overdoses. And we've seen this, with opioid overdose being an increasing contributor to maternal mortality. Some jails do provide access, but many do not. And our research at jails in particular, we surveyed all known US jails, and of the nearly 900 responses we were able to analyze, although 60% of jails said that if a pregnant person came in on methadone or buprenorphine, which are the 2 medications used in pregnancy for opioid use disorder, if someone came in on that, they would continue one of the medications or switch it. But only or less than a third of jails would allow pregnant people to initiate medication treatment. So that's a lot of pregnant people with opioid use disorder who are being forced to go through opioid withdrawal and all the associated risks and the deviation from the established standard of care. Now, I want to highlight one more finding from this research, which is that even at the jails that did provide access to methadone or buprenorphine for pregnant people, the majority of them, so over 3/4 of them, would discontinue that medication once the person was no longer pregnant. So they would discontinue it once that person was no longer carrying a fetus, showing that they valued this person only in as much as they were carrying a fetus and gestating a pregnancy, and not recognizing that opioid use disorder is a chronic condition that requires chronic treatment, and not only medication, other structural supports as well, but certainly the medication is a cornerstone. And also not recognizing that in order for you to have a healthy, thriving infant, you need a healthy, thriving parent, and being at risk for overdose and all the other harms of opioid withdrawal and lack of access to treatment does not support that.
When you talk about all these numbers, it just, every time I hear them, it makes me feel like, are we doing enough? Right. And I know we're doing as much as we can, each one of us, but 1.7 million arrests each year of women and girls, and to hear, most of in the 3,300, if we even know the amount of county jails that there are in this country, and the data is not, so I'm sure that there's much more pregnant women that are being arrested, held, detained, and then sentenced. And so when I heard you talk about, abolition to harm reduction in the beginning, and how then you said, we know while that is the goal, I think across all of us, right, to end, for us, it's ending poverty and incarceration. But in order to do that, it's going to take time, collective movement, and just, a lot of hard work. But outside of that, we have to change these conditions of confinement. We have to make sure that people have health care that they need and that they can trust. And I'm just grateful that the research that you're doing is in the forefront, because without it, and it's hard for you, right, at Johns Hopkins, to find the data and information that's necessary in order to move some of the things that are happening around women and girls. But yet, it's still like, what are we going to do? And then now you're working on opioid and the numbers on opioids and substance use there. Is there any other data, or are you all looking at data around other substances as well?
So we don't have any studies where we're collecting sort of aggregate large scale data on the numbers of pregnant people who use other substances. It was difficult to collect the data that we could, and it would be much harder, especially since we don't want to advance or suggest that there are any standards that jails should be doing urine drug screenings for pregnant patients, whereas opioid screening for opioid use is something that's a little bit more commonly done, and can, just like other use of other substances, can be done and should be done with verbal screening. But the opioid use disorder treatment has a well-established FDA-approved medication treatment. So that's just to say we are not collecting quantitative data. However, we are just beginning a new NIH-funded study with a multidisciplinary community-led team to examine to understand the experiences of Black pregnant people and postpartum people who have been pregnant in jail, who use drugs or have used drugs during pregnancy and have involvement from the family regulation system, to understand their experiences being regulated and controlled through these systems of these controlling systems of healthcare systems, the criminal legal system, and the family regulation system. And so that is inclusive of all substance use in pregnancy, not just opioid use. And that's a qualitative research study.
Okay, fantastic. I think I saw recently something in Maryland. Is that the study that you're talking about, maybe with the mayor's office?
We're not doing it with the mayor's office.
Okay.
So that's a different one, although I'd be interested to hear more about that.
Okay, so I'll make sure I connect you there. Shout out to Faith Leach, who's the Deputy Mayor of Health Equity for Baltimore City, who's also our board member, one of our board members. So I'll make sure that I connect you to her there.
Fantastic.
Because yeah, I think that would definitely be something we think about, no silos, and right, making the connections so that we have the information that we need to transform these systems. But thank you, Dr. Carolyn. And Iola, as a birth worker, you know firsthand that doulas are the frontline workers, especially in situations where the birthing person may not trust the healthcare system. When substance use is a factor, they can only be support. Can you talk about how important it is for doulas to work and to do this work with a trauma-informed harm reduction lens?
Yes. Again, thank you for having me here. I'm going to start. This is what I like to do. I like to start with kind of the bad and then be able to go to the good. So that when I'm done, we're leaving on a bright note rather than the doom and gloom of just how messed up the system is. So when I want to say harm reduction, when it comes to my practice, when it comes to my experiences with clients, I've noticed there are two worlds of harm reduction. There's the holistic approach to harm reduction, which many birth workers I work with, they really strive for. And when I say birth workers, I'm not only talking about doulas, I'm talking about your midwives, your OBs, anyone who's within the birth realm. And then there's the systematic harm reduction and what they see as what harm reduction is, which has basically made harm reduction become this mainstream buzzword that people don't quite understand, and they think they're doing good, but they're doing more harm than good. So with that, I'm going to give you some very real examples that I have seen with families over the years when it comes to any type of substance use, and that systematic harm reduction that I'm seeing, and also continue to get stories from other birth workers. Drug testing of babies with no consent of the birthing person. I have been in the room where a nurse will come in, drug test baby, they'll collect urine. And when the birthing person asks, if they do ask, they'll say, oh, we just need it to test for some things. There is no informed consent. And it's also kind of gotten out that there is a federal law requiring drug testing of all pregnant people and their babies. I've heard this rumor. That is not true. There is no federal law that requires the drug testing of all babies or all pregnant people. The denial of pain medication with the excuse of, I wouldn't want to trigger you. So clearly a provider who thinks they're doing the right thing and they're only causing more harm. And I have seen this outside of vaginal birth. I've seen this with C-sections, with pregnant people who have had C-sections, and a provider coming in and offering Tylenol and ibuprofen. C-section, having a C-section is major surgery. You want more than Tylenol and ibuprofen. Providers seeing CPS is a wonderful intervention. I live in the state of Minnesota. We have some of the worst disparities when it comes to many of things, including CPS, even though our CPS system is deemed as some of the best in the country. The irony there. And this thought of removing a child from the environment is somehow better for the child versus trying to keep birthing person and baby together, versus, and including older children, because what people do not realize, a CPS call in the midst of pregnancy or shortly after a baby is born results more in just affecting that baby. It also affects any child in that house, and can have, and we have seen families of children just moved out of the house and placed into the foster care system, which is deeply traumatic for parents and for the children. And coming back from that, if there is reunification, is hard, especially if you do not have the trauma-informed therapists and counselors to help those families work through, which we know we have a shortage of. Shaming. So you see providers who shame. Oh, you had a glass of wine, you horrible, and shaming and thinking that that is somehow going to change one's behavior. No, it makes, you know what it makes them do? They get better at hiding it, which is what you don't want. and using children as a goalpost. So this usually comes with, if you loved your children, you would do XYZ. Asking a parent, do you want to lose custody of your child? Every parent is going to say no. There's nothing that's good that comes from that question. Or think of your children. So I've seen it. Well, before you use, you should think of your children, because that will somehow magically get you to stop. It's mind blowing. Again, thinking that these interventions are great interventions and they help. And not using first person language. So describing someone as an addict versus they're a person that uses X, Y, Z. Very simple, can be hard to get used to, but once you get into the habit of it, it's easy. And all the things I have named have only added layers of trauma for the parents. It has made postpartum recovery hard. And in some cases, I have watched babies be removed from the home and a parent not be reunified for a year or two, because now they have to go down the checklist that different systems have given them in order to get their baby back. Again, very it's just traumatic. So within my doula practice, I've stopped taking clients. I do repeats. I do friends. But within my experience, everyone received trauma-informed care. That's just how it is. And you do not have to disclose what your trauma is in order to receive that care. It is just given. My basis, we all have trauma on some level, and we should never have to disclose what that trauma is in order to be treated with humanity, basic humanity. That's just how I see it. As doulas, and when talking to other doulas on supporting families and pregnant people with any substance issues, I say you have to look at your own triggers and your own biases that you're bringing to the table when you decide that you are going to help families. This work can trigger a lot of secondary trauma. I was a foster child. I was eventually adopted. There's a lot of secondary trauma that goes into that, especially when I start thinking about my own family past and how I ended up in foster care. Really addressing that. And here's the thing, there is nothing wrong with not being able to be a doula who cannot provide that care. I'd rather have you not provide that care than to go in, not address your biases, not get your own help on your own trauma, and you go in and you do way more harm. And then when it comes down to supporting families, these pregnant families and pregnant people, guess what? They are no different than my non-substance using families. There's no difference. We have the same talks. Get good prenatal care, please. Have your vitamins, support your body. Some families do need more support. But I don't see that as any different than any other family that walked in the door, whether it's getting them connected to SNAP benefits because you're noticing a food insecurity in the home, whether it's MFib, whether it's child care assistance, what that looks like, whether it's, having a real conversation with that provider who's not using first person language, who is not supporting that client, and having those mock conversations. So then when they go in to have that conversation, they're feeling empowered and know the language to use. Because sometimes the barrier really comes down to the language that you're using when you're in the room with that person and whether or not they respect you. And then honestly, we're just tracking what you're using. So what are you using? When are you using? Are you telling your provider? Are you not telling your provider? Do you know the risk of doing so and the risk of not doing so? We go over that. I believe in informed consent, true informed consent, and having that consent from them, knowing that I am their safe person and anything you tell me, unless it is putting someone in immediate danger, does not leave me. Unless you want me to talk to your provider, unless you want me to collaborate with a plan with a provider or a plan with your family or whatever that looks like. So that is kind of just my work as a doula, and how I have tried to, since I am no longer practicing, support other doulas when they do come to me with questions on what they should do. And I have referred doulas to the harm reduction site on the kits that they have there, and just really diving deeper and doing the trainings and all the things. So yeah, thank you.
No, thank you so much. Insightful information that you shared, and the fact that as a practicing doula, when you were practicing, you said taking only friends now, but the fact that you have so much information to provide and share to other people, birthing, people practicing this work, and wanting to make sure that it's coming from a trauma-informed lens. And I think often we don't think about the intersections of all these different systems. The fact that even for me, being doing this work and not even thinking about how the foster care system plays a role, and what does that look like, and how it's important not to shame people for their own shortcomings, right? Like, we're all going through different things, we're all struggling with different things, and how are we giving people the space to be able to share that with someone that they trust, when they've been failed so often. And whether it is through the foster care system, through the incarceration system, through the medical system, through any of these institutional systems, and that harm reduction. And the more and more I'm just hearing this, it's like, how do we make sure that every single person that is working with people to dismantle these systems are coming from this lens? So I'm excited that the toolkits are there, and that our network is starting to learn more and really wanting to get engaged. So thank you so much for the information that you provided. And I'm hoping that people will begin to start to ask some of those questions. But I want to move on to Jamil. Your film, The Bond, follows an incarcerated pregnant woman who goes into labor and must fight to stay connected to her baby in the system built to keep them apart. What was your inspiration behind this film? And who is the intended audience? And how do you see your film impacting them?
I hope that you all can hear me. I'm having a bit of a delay. Can you hear me? Yeah.
We can hear you. It's very hard to hear you. It's a bad delay.
Can you hear me? Hello? I can't tell if you guys hear me or not. This is hold on. Hello?
Topeka, I think you're muted. We can't hear you.
Can you all hear me? Yeah? Okay. I am sorry. I've had the worst internet connection. So basically, the question, I believe that Topeka, could you re-ask your question? Oh, what was my inspiration? Okay, so basically, I think I'm here to represent sort of the children who were born under these conditions that you all have been speaking about. My film is inspired by my mother's experience giving birth to me while she was incarcerated. She had been arrested for possession. She was a substance user, and she was arrested for possession. And when she gave birth to me, she was shackled, with leg irons and chains. And the experience was so traumatizing to her she that she ended up relapsing as soon as she got out of prison months later. And so for me, a filmmaker who believes that the personal is political, I think that my goal in telling this story was one to create empathy and to create representation. And I think that just to get back to some of just to piggyback on some of the comments that were made earlier about the importance of empathy, respect, and community building, I think that film has this incredible power to do that. I think film is an empathy machine. And so I wanted to tell this story and not just sort of rehash my mom's experience, even though that was sort of the starting point. I spent a lot of time doing research because I wanted the film to be sort of a broader representation of all of the women and children and healthcare workers and even the cops and the police officers who are often sort of maligned for the work that they do. So I wanted to tell a story about sort of how the system bonds all of us under those circumstances, and then I hope sort of create a representation of of empathy and connection and sort of an answer to like how we can start to fix this issue. Are you all able to still hear me okay? Yes. Okay. Yeah. And so, in my research, I actually came across Dr. Carolyn's work and used it as a tool in my research. And so, yeah, for me, it was basically telling the story, making sure that everybody in the film was humanized, and mostly the goal was to amplify, this conversation that I think is already happening, and by creating representation and talking about this and creating like sort of a visual tool that we could use to sort of tell this story. That's a short film that's 16 minutes long. I thought that we could do a lot of work towards destigmatizing, amplifying the conversation, giving people who even might be like officers working in corrections. I mean, of course, like we said, the system is not going to be dismantled tomorrow, right? But if we can somehow, welcome people who work within the system into the conversation by not just completely alienating them, I could have easily told a story, completely based off of what my mom experienced, which was this officer was pretty, cruel and evil to her. I decided to humanize the officer because I felt like I didn't want to alienate anybody in corrections who I think we need them to also see the work that needs to be done on their end. Right? It's like I'm preaching to the choir. I know all of us here understand this story, but I think that the work that can be done is showing people who are in those systems, those positions of power, that they can also tap into their humanity. Just because the prison system is asking for everybody involved to do away with their humanity and their empathy, it doesn't mean that they have to. And so I wanted to tell this broad story, and then I wanted to end the story sort of with some light at the end, like Iola talks about, making sure that even if we start this story with sort of the I start the film, and we see the horrors of the prison system laid bare, but I think it was really important to end sort of with imageries of connection between not just mother and child, but the women who are there together, who can build community themselves, and who often do, right? Who often do, like within this horrible system, they find a way to see each other as full people. And so, yeah, I wanted to end sort of this film with not just woe is me, you know, this is a traumatic situation, but the message is that bonds of empathy, even within the prison system, even within the United States, where our rights as women are constantly being threatened, even within the system, because the prison is just a microcosm for what's happening in larger society, right? And so I figured that if we have this film that is in fact showing light on how we can hold on to our humanity, and how we can build connection and empathy, even within the most desolate of situations. I think that is what's going to keep us going as people. And so, yeah, for me, this film is for the mothers who experience the trauma of giving birth while they're shackled, or mothers who experience the trauma of being, incarcerated during which should be one of the most natural and most, exciting moments of their lives. It's for the children themselves who are born under those conditions, and who are or children who who live with incarcerated parents, the kids who are separated from their parents because of the carceral system, because of addiction issues, um, and I think for people who could become allies from everywhere that they stand, um, because we have a lot of work to do, like in terms of legislation nationally. I think what we've seen is sort of the anti-shackling movement is about, making sure that women are not shackled while they're at any point during their pregnancy and postpartum. But it seems like sort of people are working, statewide, right? Like they're able to pass these laws from state to state, and I think that we need this national movement to happen. And I think that the work that I'm trying to do is create a tool that we can use. And it's a short film, I think it's a visual tool. I think people really can connect when they see the story visually. And I think it is something that we can sort of just pass along. It's a story that we can pass along, and we can also use it to, like I said before, amplify the conversation, get women who are living in silence, who experience this, to come out, right? Because that's how this abuse continues to happen, and the trauma continues to happen, is because people think that their experiences are unique. And unfortunately, my mom's experience happened, in in 19. I'm not gonna go specifically tell y'all exactly when that happened, but it was sometime in the late 80s. And but my mother's experience happened, so long ago, but yet we know that more than 20 states, this is still something that's happening. So right now, as we're talking about reproductive justice, and we feel, it's getting even worse, I think now there's no better time than now to demand this ban on shackling across the United States. And like we said, this is an intersectional issue, right? And so when we're talking about reproductive justice, we need to talk about women who are incarcerated, or who have impacted by the carceral system. Because if we can't talk about and women who use substances, if we can't humanize, we're only as human as the people who the people that we dehumanize, the most, right? Like, so it's like, once people who are sort of seen sort of throwaway people, we have to end that. And once we can, I think, bring them into the fold and bring them into the conversation, and I think that everybody else will benefit from it, right? And so I guess that's where I stand. Um, that's where I stand. I'm a person who, I'm not a mother, but I am the child, and then I am a person who's just trying to use whatever tool I have to do this work. And like we said, ending the silos, seeing everything as intersectional. That's where the work really begins.
Yes, can you all hear me? Okay. What can we do with technology, but just try to run with it. So I know that there's a little delay. I see myself as a delay. Thank you so much, Jamil, I'm sorry, for all of that incredible information. And the bond is in a, yes, Mercury is in retrograde. It is the truth. All that incredible information that you provided in the film, which we will be partnering on the screening for. Now, we had a few questions for the Q&A. I'm going to move this over to Starling, who is our Director of Communications, and ask that she just run us through the questions before we close out. Thank you, Starling.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Jamil, your film is just phenomenal. I literally cried from opening scene until the end, and I'm just as impacted as well. And my mother also too gave birth to my youngest sibling, handcuffed and chained to a bed in the Texas Department of Corrections. So, it definitely gives you that feeling of not being alone. When you can actually visually see that. And it's just a great film. So I can't wait for everybody to watch it. Everyone who registered to attend this panel will get a link to watch it, and because it will be private, and then we will also be posting it on our social media. So stay tuned for that. So we have 2 questions that came in. The first one, and any of our panelists can just jump in. This one might be more for you, Iola, but it's how can we work to train doulas to be aware of the dangers of CPS?
That's a loaded question. Seeing that there's many ways. So if we're talking about a doula in a traditional sense of how we all have known them, you go through a certifying body, and that certifying body gives you this training, and then you go off into the world. There are very few certifying bodies on a national base that actually go through any CPS training. I actually don't know of any. I do know some locally here in Minnesota are culturally congruent, so therefore they do address CPS because it tends to be within the communities that CPS affects the most here in Minnesota. In order to do that, that would really honestly would have to have a reckoning with a lot of your certifying bodies who really don't want to do this in the first place. Of racial disparities when it comes to maternal health is very real. I feel that this is an ongoing battle. It's always a fight. You go in any group, a donor group, wherever you're looking at, and there is just, it sets off a wildfire because it's not in the curriculum. They may address it at a conference, but it's not part of the curriculum. So we're not addressing the racial disparity aspect. We're not doing into the DEI. And I get very hesitant when I talk DEI because, again, it's a buzzword. So like everyone's doing DEI now and anyone can become a DEI consultant. And there's, no regulation on who becomes what. But it really has to start with these national bodies, like recognizing that we do have racial disparities when it comes to birth. We do have, again, another one, not all people who give birth are women. Like we have to acknowledge these smaller parts before we can move to the CPS and really wrapping our minds around and getting people to wrap their minds around how CPS is not the good guy, that has been portrayed in society, that it does more harm, and the harm that it actually does. When you have these conversations one-on-one with people, it's really interesting because it's like a bubble has burst. They're like, oh, I did not know this. So it's really addressing those smaller issues before we build up to that bigger issue, because it encompasses everything.
Thank you for that, Isla. It just shows how much work we have. This fight is ongoing. The next question is, what is the one thing that can be done now to change the way pregnancy and substance use is viewed in this country? Anyone can jump in.
Well, I will say, for me, it is really looking at ourselves and our own biases and the stigma that we hold, the prejudices that we hold. It's a lot of reflection and a work of profound humility, to really look at yourself and be like, wait a minute, I've learned these things, I've integrated them, and this is how I see people. And it is it's constant work for us to do that with ourselves before we can do it outside, right? So I would say really trying to understand where these things come from for us so that we can view people as human beings, and to really give them the opportunity to be human and make decisions for themselves. And I think that also is about education, right? How do we educate ourselves around some of these things? So go visit the National Harm Reduction Coalition webpage, visit the webpage of the LOHM, reach out to Ayola, to Dr. Sufrin, watch Jamil's film, right? Visit the Academy of Perinatal Harm Reduction, and there's tons of information there, like the issue around language, which I think Ayola was mentioning. I think that is so important. There's things that we can do now, even saying person who uses drugs, person who uses substances, instead of saying addict, right? That there, it already humanizes someone in a way. I think the more that we do that, the more that we practice that, I think that that's something that we can do now in this moment.
Thank you so much for that. I hear myself now. Can you all hear me? Okay, great. Starling, I didn't know if there were any more questions that we should share, because I know we're at time now.
We did have one. I mean, I think we have a few minutes to spare. We are at time, but
Okay.
someone was asking about the toolkit, the harm reduction toolkit. If you could just give a little bit more information. We did drop in the chat, but if you could just give a little bit more information about that before we end.
And before you do that, Tanagra, really quickly, I saw that Dr. Sufrin had to leave. So we just want to thank her for her time and her brilliance and all the work that she has been doing forever on this work. And we're just so grateful to be partnered with you, and that you always answer every single call to share this information with the community. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It was an honor to share this space with my co-panelists and be part of this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
The toolkit was a joint effort between National Harm Reduction Coalition and the Academy of Perinatal Harm Reduction. It's free and it's available on our website, and folks can download it. They can really study it. They can think through it. They can reach out to us and or the Academy of Perinatal Harm Reduction for training as well. We are part of the CDC Harm Reduction Technical Assistance and Training Center. So if you're interested in receiving training from us, you can reach out to us through that, and you can submit a request. And we can offer training free of cost to folks, and we can offer it with a broad variety of spectrum of topics, but particularly this one. So if this is something that folks are thinking about and want to learn more, reach out to us. You'll have my email, and we'd be happy. And there's 2 trainings that are happening this month as well through the LOHM that have to do with harm reduction, and also how to support people who are pregnant and use substances. So feel free to connect with the LOHM to see how you can be involved in those. And, I will give out more information, and you can always connect with me. I'm excited to talk to folks about this. As you can tell, me encanta. I love it.
Well, we love you. Thank you so much for that information. I think I would just want to close with this. There has been a movement of previously incarcerated women leading legislation called Dignity for Incarcerated Women, working to end shackling of women during child labor, amongst other, making sure that women have access to proper hygiene products at no cost to them. And while we've been talking through this panel, it's been a theme, right, that we are looking to close prisons and jails. Really, though we're still looking to do that, we have to make sure the conditions of confinement are made humane while we're waiting to do that. While we believe at the Ladies of Hope Ministries, if a woman is safe enough to be with her child in prison, then a woman is safe enough to be with her child outside of a prison. So we don't believe at any stage of pregnancy that a woman should be incarcerated, because that also brings impacts to the child, the unborn child, and that should not be something that's happening. And though also during the Federal First Step Act, we were able to get the dignity provisions put in to end shackling of women during child labor on a federal level, like everything else, you have to make sure that there's oversight and that things are being implemented appropriately. Because what happens is, though we've seen where sisters have led this work and passed this legislation, there has still been in states where sisters are still being shackled during child labor, even when um, the law has been changed in that state. And so we talk about, informing and making sure that people, even the officers that are there, that they are made aware of the things that are changing, and how we also making sure that the people who are presently incarcerated, our sisters and or birthing people who are incarcerated, that they have the information and the laws that are readily available to them so that they can resist, because they understand what that law is. But we are grateful for all of you for being here this evening. Thank you for everyone who's joined in. Again, we are doing a screening of the bond. So please make sure those, again, who have registered for this will also automatically be registered for the screening. But anyone else, please share. This is about getting the message out, for people to see and be reminded, right? If you've never been shackled during child labor or any part of the pregnancy process, I have it. I was actually incarcerated with a sister who was, and I just could not understand for the life of me, even in a camp, that they would shackle her when technically you're not supposed to shackle people in that level of security, right? Because it's considered community custody, but they were still doing it. And we hear about the devastation and stories of sisters losing their children because of the way the system is abusing them and their own biases to how women and birthing people should be treated that are within these systems. And so this conversation is necessary. This work is necessary. Each one of you are necessary. And I'm grateful to God for everything that you are doing and continue to do. And so again, thank you everyone for joining this evening. Please make sure that you reach out to us if you want to get in contact with anyone who's on the panel that you have not gotten the information from. And have a good evening. Thank you.